Hello, good evening. We start tonight in the Middle East, where Israel has confirmed Hamas's top leader has been killed in a military operation in southern Gaza. Yahya Sinwar was one of the chief architects of the October 7th attack on Israel last year and has been their main target since the conflict began. A warning that we're about to show an image from the scene of the Israeli military operation in Gaza that some may find distressing. Well, this image appears to show Israeli soldiers at the scene of the attack with the body of a man believed to be Yahya Sinwar in that rubble. In the last few minutes, we've heard from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said the death of Yahya Sinwar offers a chance of peace in the Middle East, but he warned the war in Gaza is still not over.
He was killed by our heroic soldiers, and today we have finished our accounts with him. The evil has suffered a very harsh blow today, but we have not concluded our task. And to the dearly beloved families and members of the families of the hostages, we will continue until all those dearly beloved will be brought home.
Benjamin Netanyahu speaking there. Well, we can go live now to Jerusalem and our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. Alistair, it feels like the question that so many people will be asking tonight is, could this be the beginning of the end of the war, or is that, frankly, naive?
Yeah, I don't think we're at that stage. I think this is, it is very significant, and I think it could have significant repercussions. I don't think we are looking at the end of the war in Gaza, at least not in the short term. Israel still has 101 hostages in Gaza, and it needs to negotiate their release or find them and free them through military means. Neither of those options are going to be quick options. And secondly, Israel still needs to fight Hamas. Hamas is more than just one man. The killing of its leader deals a serious blow to the organisation. But I would expect that Hamas fighters that remain in Gaza remain fighting. And then there is the issue of what happens if the war does come to an end. Who governs Gaza? Who pays for its reconstruction? Who looks after and manages its security? And none of those questions have an answer to them. Benjamin Netanyahu has not yet formulated, or if he has formulated, he's certainly not made public, a day after plan for Gaza. So, yeah, a significant moment today, a major victory for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli government, the Israeli military, the Israeli public. But if we are thinking that this could be a moment, a turning point in the war, I think that might be premature.
Thanks for the analysis, Alistair. Can you also just give us a bit of a picture of who was Yahya Sinwar? You say he was a significant figure. What do we know about him?
Sure. He was born in Khan Yunis, the second largest city in Gaza, in the sort of southern centre of Gaza. He joined Hamas in the late 1980s, just shortly after Hamas was formed during the first Intifada, the uprising, the Palestinian uprising against the Israelis. He spent about 2 decades in an Israeli prison for killing 4 people that he believed were informants for Israel. In prison, he learnt Hebrew. He became a fluent, very proficient speaker of Hebrew to communicate with his jailers, but to also better understand and to get into the heads of his enemy, the Israelis. He was released in 2011, a massive Palestinian prisoner release in exchange for Gilad Shalit, who was an Israeli soldier being held hostage in Gaza. He then went to climb the ranks of Hamas in Gaza. At the time of October the 7th, which he almost certainly masterminded and was one of the major architects of October the 7th, he was the leader of Hamas in Gaza. But then after the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, in Tehran back in July, Sinwar assumed overall control of Hamas. Hamas is an organisation that's not just confined to Gaza. That's where it has ruled, but it has elements in Lebanon, in the West Bank, of course, in Turkey, and the political leadership in Doha. So Sinwar became the overall leader of all of that. He became Hamas's point man for the negotiations to broker a ceasefire and a hostage release deal. And so he was Israel's most wanted man. It took them, well, it didn't just take them this year to try and find him. They'd tried to kill him in the past, but over the last 12 and a bit months, they'd repeatedly tried to find him. They felt they got close on a number of occasions, but he always slipped the net. But yesterday, in southern Gaza, in Tal al-Sultan, which is a neighborhood in Rafah, where I was actually in only a few weeks ago, they found him and they eventually killed the man that they'd been hunting for.
You say you were in that neighborhood just a few weeks ago. What kind of area was it?
So this is a neighborhood in sort of western Rafah, sort of between the center of the city and the Mediterranean coast. It was one of the last pockets of major Hamas resistance in the south. There was still fighting going on when we were in there. It was completely flattened. There was barely a house left standing. Those that were still standing were unlivable. They were badly damaged. There was clear evidence of heavy fighting, heavy airstrikes. It is where, as well, 6 hostages had been found murdered about 6 weeks ago in a tunnel beneath there. And it was still the scene of battles between the IDF and Hamas. And so it's like a lot of Gaza now. I've been into Khan Yunis as well, a similar picture. Buildings just completely razed to the ground. And that leads us to the question of who is going to rebuild Gaza, how long will it take to do it, and more pressingly, for the people, the Palestinians in Gaza now, with the onset of winter in a few weeks' time probably, a major humanitarian crisis still going on, millions displaced, and calls for more humanitarian aid to get into Gaza urgently.
You are talking there about how he's been Israel's most wanted man for a considerable period of time. They've tried to kill him before, they've only just succeeded. We, of course, heard from Benjamin Netanyahu saying that when they did manage to kill Yahya at Sinwar, he was hiding in a dark den. He was killed when he fled in a panic from our soldiers. That's obviously what Benjamin Netanyahu was saying. Do we know very much at all about the operation that succeeded?
We don't know much about the operation, but let me sort of flip what Netanyahu had to say and paint another picture. And the reason I'm doing this is this will be a picture that is seen by Palestinians, the picture that is seen by people in Gaza. Firstly, we shouldn't assume that Hamas are unpopular in Gaza, regardless of the devastation that has been reaped upon Gaza over the past year. Hamas are still quite popular as the resistance against Israelis. There was an assumption that Sinwar was hiding in the tunnels, surrounding himself with some of the living hostages as human shields. Perhaps that has been the case. But go back to 2021, after a short 11-day war between Israel and Hamas, and Yahya Sinwar was pictured sitting on an armchair in the rubble of a building, and it was seen around the Middle East as an image of defiance and really an image of victory, that they had seen off Israel during that war. Well, the images of Sinwar dead, but dead above ground, wearing combat fatigues and not hiding in a bunker underground, many people in Gaza, many people in the wider Middle East will also see that as an image of the Hamas leader and as an image of resistance.
Thank you very much indeed, Alistair. Alistair Bunkle there, reporting for us on this significant day in the Middle East conflict, because, as we've been reporting today, Israel has confirmed that they have killed the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, the top leader of Hamas and one of the chief architects of the October 7 attack. We can bring in now our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, for more on this story. Alex, just how significant a day is this?
I think this, Sophie, is a very significant moment. What exactly it means will take some time to unravel. But if Yahya Sinwar was Israel's Osama bin Laden and October the 7th was their 9/11, this is a very significant scalp. But ultimately, one man does not make up Hamas, and one man did not make up Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda still persists, and so will Hamas. We heard from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the war will continue. He did not declare total victory, although he said that this was it was a big moment for the country. There are, of course, other conflicts going on which are linked in some ways to Gaza, in other ways not linked, depending on your perspective. If you are Hezbollah, you are firing rockets into northern Israel. You started that process on October the 8th in solidarity with the Gazans. I'm not sure that the Israelis see it that way. I'm not sure that they link the war that they are now in with Hezbollah to Gaza. They, I think, effectively see that as a failure of really resolving what happened after 2006 and UN Resolution 1701, which, as far as they're concerned, hasn't been enforced. So I think it's probably quite likely that they will carry on the momentum that they have to make sure that when the fighting does end here, they don't have a heavily armed militant group, Hezbollah, sponsored, of course, by the Iranians, lapping against their border. They have degraded Hezbollah. They have significantly weakened the group. They have decapitated the leadership, taking, of course, the scalp of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader. But I think there are people in the Israeli government, and Benjamin Netanyahu is one of them, the Prime Minister, who will say there's unfinished business here, and we have things that we want to achieve before negotiations and diplomacy can really start to begin. That said, the killing of Yahya Sinwar is significant because, I mean, as opposed to yesterday, you may not have seen a possible pathway to the end of this crisis. You can now see how that end could come about. It may be that the Americans, after the election is after the way, start putting on a great deal of pressure on Netanyahu, saying, look, what's happening in Gaza is, it's just so terrible now. You've achieved all of the aims that you could have possibly hoped to achieve. Really, now is the time to wrap that up, and that would calm a lot of the tensions within the region. But there are still a lot of things unresolved, a lot of red lines that have been broken, and new red lines that need to be established. I'm thinking, for instance, the fact that in April, the Iranians fired missiles at the Israelis. In October, a similar thing happened. You had a response also from the Israelis as well. So that's something that's broken down. That was the first time you had this direct contact between the two. Is that now a new norm? And what does that mean? How will that play out in the days and weeks to come? Again, we don't know the answer to all of that. And Yahya Sinwar, although it's significant, it is just one man. So it's quite possible that the violence does continue for some time.
Alex, just stay with us because I've got a bit of breaking news for you that I want to get your reaction to coming through from the States, because a spokesperson for President Biden has said that DNA tests have now confirmed that Hamas's leader, Yahya Sinwar, is dead. The statement says this is a good day for Israel, for the United States and for the world. So that coming in there from the White House, DNA test confirming that Hamas's leader is dead. That statement from Biden. And apparently the president will be speaking soon with Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss bringing the hostages home. That statement there from Joe Biden. Alex, how, I guess, significant do you think that call will be from the United States?
Well, I mean, it's hard to know exactly what will go on in that conversation between the two men. We know that the relationship has been very, very difficult. It's been quite fractious in recent months. They spoke quite recently, but that was the first time they'd spoken since August. And if one of the things that people within the region have looked at is actually how powerless the United States has been in all of this to bring its influence to bear on what is a crucial ally.
Alex, I'm just going to jump in because I'm going to take you to the United States, where Kamala Harris is speaking now. Vice President Kamala Harris.
Say to any terrorist who kills Americans, threatens the American people, or threatens our troops or our interests, know this: we will always bring you to justice. Israel has a right to defend itself, and the threat Hamas poses to Israel must be eliminated. Today, there is clear progress toward that goal. Hamas is decimated, and its leadership is eliminated. This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. And it is time for the day after to begin without Hamas in power. We will not give up on these goals, and I will always work to create a future of peace, dignity, and security for all. I thank you all.
Is the U.S. asking Israel to end the war now, Madam Vice President?
With that short statement there from the Vice President, Kamala Harris, we've of course heard from President Joe Biden that he's going to be talking to Benjamin Netanyahu shortly. Alex, just to go back to you and return to what you were saying about the importance of that relationship between the United States and Israel.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite interesting listening to Kamala Harris. The emphasis she was putting on really, it was the beginning of the end. She was talking about how the day after this war, or in the days after it, that there must be a chance for, you know, an equitable end for the Palestinians, and she used that phrase, self-determination. I'm not sure how that's going to be seen amongst Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cabinet. Remember, it's described as the most right-wing in Israel's history. Many of the people around him, including him, say that there won't be a Palestinian state. But that's certainly the track that the Americans, or at least the Democrats, are on. Of course, we don't know who's going to be in the White House after the next election, and I think they will be watching that very closely in Israel. The permutations of what all that mean will have a knock-on effect here for the region. But I suppose, Sophie, the kind of takeaway point, the interesting thing to bear in mind, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, he was slammed in Israel for saying this, but he has said, in his view, that October the 7th, there was never any justification. It was an atrocity. It was terrible. But it didn't happen in a vacuum. It didn't happen in isolation. There is a problem that has been unresolved since the creation of Israel in 1948, and that is what to do about the Palestinian question. And that persists even if you can damp down the flames around the region now, if you can stop the violence on the border here in Lebanon, if you can sort out the crisis in Gaza and stop the fighting with Hamas and get the hostages back, if you can even sort of damp down the Iranian question, that question still remains, and that's going to be a thorn in everybody's side in the region, not just Israel's, because the Palestinian question has an awful habit of spilling out across the region into other countries. That remains, so that problem still needs to be sorted out. Now, my guess is that actually what will happen is that the crisis will calm down and it will be managed as it has been for decades. But that ultimately means that it will erupt again, because there are two competing narratives within the region, the Palestinian one and the Israeli one. Neither side sees the justice in either's narrative, so that friction, that possibility to continue conflict, even if you can manage it in the short term, that continues, and that's the fundamental question. But that, of course, is what Kamala Harris was getting at when she was talking about self-determination for the Palestinians. There are many people in the region, of course, who will look at the government, you know, down the coast. It always strikes you when you're standing in Lebanon. It's not very far away geographically, but there are many people in that cabinet in Israel who will not see it that way at all.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. Alex Rossi speaking to us there from Beirut. Well, of course, as you would expect, we are getting some political and diplomatic reaction into the news that Israel has killed the leader of Hamas, one of the key architects of the October 7 attack, a man called Yahya Sinwar, and a statement, of course, from President Biden saying that DNA tests confirm that death. Now, we've also had a statement here in the UK from the Defence Secretary, John Healey. Now, in the statement, he says, "I, for one, will not mourn the death of a terror leader like Sinwar, someone who was responsible for the terror attack on October the 7th. And I'm conscious, like the UK government is, that triggered not just the darkest, deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Second World War, but it's triggered since more than a year of conflict and an intolerable level of civilian Palestinian casualties as well." That statement there from John Healey. We've also had a statement in from Israel's president, that's Isaac Herzog. That reads, "Sinwar, the mastermind behind the deadly October 7th attack, has for years been responsible for heinous acts of terrorism against Israeli civilians, citizens of other countries, and the murder of thousands of innocent people. His evil endeavours were dedicated to terror, bloodshed, and destabilising the Middle East. Now more than ever, we must act in every way possible to bring back the 101 hostages who are still being held in horrific conditions by Hamas terrorists in Gaza." Well, of course, we've heard from the US a bit of an optimistic note, you may say, struck by both the President Joe Biden and also the Vice President Kamala Harris about the prospect of some kind of end to the war. But in the last hour, we've also heard from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who I think it's fair to say struck a bit of a different tone. Let's take a listen as to what he had to say.
"I am standing here today to announce, to notify you that he has been killed. Yahya Sinwar, he who killed and prepared the worst massacre ever of our people since the Holocaust. He was killed by our heroic soldiers. And today we have finished our accounts with him. The evil has suffered a very harsh blow today, but we have not concluded our task. And to the dearly beloved families and members of the families of the hostages, we will continue until all those dearly beloved will be brought home, because that is our supreme commitment, my supreme commitment. And to the people of Gaza, I am telling you that Sinwar told you that, in fact, he was reigning and doing so well, but in fact he was hiding in a little dark cave. But now that he has been eliminated, you will see that there will be a decline of the evil and they will no longer reign over Gaza. This is the beginning. This is the day after Hamas now. It is now an opportunity for you to be released and freed of his tyranny. And to you, the Hamas, believe me, the leaders, they can never flee us. They will be eliminated. But for those who are willing to lay down their arms from the Hamas and free the hostages, believe me, they will be saved. But those who do not, their days are numbered if they dare hurt any of the hostages. It is now bringing about the end of the war. And to the people of the region, Gaza, Beirut, and the whole region, the dark is now retreating. The light is coming out. Nasrallah, Akil, and so many of their other comrades, their days are numbered. They are no longer here. It is an opportunity for us to thwart that evil and bring about a positive future, one where we will be able to see how a blessing will be upon us.
Benjamin Netanyahu speaking there, saying evil has suffered a heavy blow, but Israel's task is not complete. Statement released there after Yahya Sinwar's death was confirmed. We can now take a listen to the US Vice President Kamala Harris. She's been speaking in Milwaukee in Wisconsin in the last few minutes.
Today, Israel confirmed that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, is dead, and justice has been served. And the United States, Israel, and the entire world are better off as a result. Sinwar was responsible for the killing of thousands of innocent people, including the victims of October 7 and hostages killed in Gaza. He had American blood on his hands. Today, I can only hope that the families of the victims of Hamas feel a sense and measure of relief. Sinwar was the mastermind of October 7, the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. A terrorist attack that killed 1,200 innocent people and included horrific sexual violence and more than 250 hostages taken into Gaza, including 7 Americans, living and deceased, who remain in captivity. A terrorist attack that triggered a devastating war in Gaza, a war that has led to unconscionable suffering of many innocent Palestinians and greater instability throughout the Middle East. In the past year, American special operations and intelligence personnel have worked closely with their Israeli counterparts to locate and track Sinwar and other Hamas leaders. And I commend their work. And I will say, to any terrorist who kills Americans, threatens the American people, or threatens our troops or our interests, know this: we will always bring you to justice. Israel has a right to defend itself, and the threat Hamas poses to Israel must be eliminated. Today, there is clear progress toward that goal. Hamas is decimated, and its leadership is eliminated. This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. And it is time for the day after to begin, without Hamas in power. We will not give up on these goals, and I will always work to create a future of peace, dignity, and security for all. I thank you all.
Is the U.S. asking? Is the U.S.
Vice President Kamala Harris speaking there in Milwaukee, saying that the killing of Yahya Sinwar gives an opportunity to finally end the war in the Middle East. That is what she said, an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. Will you join us on an evening where Israel has confirmed Hamas's top leader has been killed in a military operation in southern Gaza? Yahya Sinwar was one of the chief architects of the October the 7th attack on Israel last year. He's also been their main target since the conflict began. A warning that we're about to show you an image from the scene of the Israeli military operation in Gaza, which some may find distressing. So the image that you're looking at right now appears to show Israeli soldiers at the scene of the attack. And you can see there, of course, the body of a man believed to be Yahya Sinwar in the rubble. Israel confirming the death of Yahya Sinwar. And of course, we have also heard from the President of the United States, Joe Biden, saying that DNA confirms his death. Now, in the last hour, we've also heard from Benjamin Netanyahu, who said the death of Yahya Sinwar offers a chance of peace in the Middle East, but he did warn the war in Gaza is still not over.
He was killed by our heroic soldiers, and today we have finished our accounts with him. The evil has suffered a very harsh blow today, but we have not concluded our task. And to the dearly beloved families and members of the families of the hostages, we will continue until all those dearly beloved will be brought home.
I just want to bring you a statement from the White House's Jake Sullivan, because we have been hearing a lot, of course, from Israel this evening, but we've also been hearing an awful lot out of the United States reacting to this as well and trying to push what they hope to happen next. So this statement through from Jake Sullivan of the White House, he says that the US now expects to see progress on the ground on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. He says that they've had constructive communications with Israel on its potential response to Iran. So you can see there the kind of diplomacy in the background. Jake Sullivan there saying that they've been having constructive communications with Israel, but they expect to see progress on the ground on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And really, I think, echoing what we heard from Vice President Kamala Harris earlier, where she says that the death of Yahya Sinwar, one of the chief architects of the October 7th attack on Israel, really does offer, as she says, an opportunity to end the war in Gaza. But of course, it does remain to be seen the all-important response of Benjamin Netanyahu. He says the conflict is not over, and of course highlighting the 101 hostages who still remain in Gaza yet to be returned. And of course, important to say that although this is an extremely significant day for the Middle East, for Israel, for Gaza, and of course for the world, it is just one man. I do want to return now just for a moment to domestic news here in the United Kingdom. But of course, we're going to be keeping you up to speed with all of those developments in the Middle East just as soon as we get them. Any response from the United States, any response from Israel, and of course, any response from Hamas as well, who've yet to confirm the killing. But here, back in the United Kingdom, the cabinet appears to be fractious as it approaches its first budget. Rumours of ministers going over the head of the Chancellor straight to the Prime Minister with complaints of spending cuts to their departments. And now we understand this turbulence led to delays in the Treasury submitting the main parts of its financial plans to the official forecaster. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, reports.
A deadline reached, a deadline missed. Talks on the budget close to stalemate with just 2 weeks to go. A Chancellor at odds with Cabinet colleagues, a Prime Minister brought in to referee, 3 members of the Cabinet raising the alarm with number 10. They say the justice system, the transport network and local government cannot withstand a further squeeze. It could mean a legal system in peril.
Parts of the system are already on the point of collapse. That means trials being delayed to the point where they break down. That means criminals walking free. That means victims not getting justice. And when this breaks down, it is more important than just the individuals involved. It's actually the rule of law. It's the rules which govern our society that keep us safe.
But you are going to have to pay more for that.
Price hikes for trains and buses.
Lots of new companies wanting to run train services like Lumo to Rochdale, for example, competing with the current operators. Well, allowing that sort of private competition was going to be one of the bits of private sector involvement that was going to be allowed alongside Great British Railways. I think they might have to cut back on some of those ideas because they're going to need every penny of income in the rail industry to be able to make the nationalisation affordable.
Hard choices for councils.
They're making difficult decisions. Do they have to reduce home to school transport? Are they cutting school crossing patrols? Some councils that are facing closing libraries or reducing support to the most vulnerable. That's the real life impact of the work that local councils do that too often people don't see.
One government, but 2 opposing views. The Chancellor in the building behind me, like the Prime Minister next door, are aligned. They believe that a bit more pay now will free up more money to spend closer to the next general election. But some Cabinet ministers are dragging their feet over this budget because they believe that the pain now is just too much to bear. We find out who's right in a fortnight. This is the image the government wants to project. A Chancellor in total control. Behind the scenes, it's being tested. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, is the Chancellor facing a revolt from the Cabinet when the budget is published in just 13 days' time? Earlier, I spoke to the former Chief of Staff to the ex-Chancellor George Osborne, Rupert Harrison. Now, he believes Labour's backed itself into a corner ahead of the budget with its manifesto promises. Thanks very much for being on the programme. Good
Thanks
to have you
for
here. What are you expecting to see in the budget?
Well, I think the main thing we're going to see in the budget is significant tax rises to fund significant increase in public spending. And that's a very difficult situation that Rachel Reeves has got herself into ahead of the budget, because all of the Labour Party's political ambitions require that big increase in public spending. But of course, they spent the election campaign effectively ruling out the main tax rises. So that is the conundrum that she has created for herself as we head into the budget.
So they've effectively kind of closed off some of the avenues that they could use.
Exactly, and that is actually not something that previous chancellors coming into government have always done. So if you look at Gordon Brown in '97 and George Osborne in 2010, they were both quite careful always to not get pinned down on the big tax rises. The standard answer was always, no chancellor will ever tie their hands, got to have flexibility, I don't want to raise tax, but, and all of that. Whereas Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves were very, very explicit in the election campaign. They would not increase income tax.
Well, they had to, didn't they, really? Because, the Conservatives were fighting a campaign on a tax bombshell.
They were put under pressure, but they didn't have to rule it out. And I think that's created quite a difficult situation. I think they came in thinking that they would find a lot of other tax rises that they could use to raise the revenues. But the problem is, I think they came in with some very optimistic assumptions about what some of those taxes would raise, particularly taxes on mobile international capital and individuals, like capital gains tax and non-DOMs. And I think some of those numbers have been knocked down very significantly by the OBR.
You mentioned there that they need to increase taxes to effectively increase public spending. And of course, part of the reason that Labour feel they need to do that is because of the savage cuts that were penciled in by the previous government. Even if they do increase spending in some areas, there's going to be a squeeze, right? You, of course, were George Osborne's right-hand man during the austerity years. Do you think we're going to see austerity under this government?
Well, the question is how you define austerity. Rachel Reeves has now said no austerity.
Yeah, but
what does that mean?
You're Mr. Austerity, aren't you, in a way? So in your definition, do you think we're going to see austerity?
Well, I mean, austerity was really a strategy to deal with a huge budget deficit. So this Labour government talk about their inheritance, but actually, if you go back to 2010, we had a budget deficit of more than 10% of GDP. So it was a requirement by a coalition government, not just Conservatives, but also Liberal Democrats, to reduce spending over time in order to bring the deficit down. If you actually look at Jeremy Hunt's plans in this election, he did actually have spending increasing in real terms. But of course, bigger increases in some departments, like the NHS, would still have meant tough settlements in other departments. But that's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, but just to pin you down, with your own definition, would you define it as austerity that we're going to see?
So I think that Rachel Reeves has allowed other people to define it. And interestingly, the Institute for Fiscal Studies have now come out and said that really to be able to claim no austerity, you've basically got to have no government department seeing real terms cuts in its budget. Now, that is asking quite a lot, because you could have overall increases in departmental spending being quite significant, but if you were channeling those towards your priorities, whether that's the NHS or defence, it's likely that one or two departments are going to take some of the slack by having cuts. If you're allowing other people to define no austerity, which is I think what's happened, as no cuts in government departments, that's where you get into numbers like 20, 25 billion pounds of tax rises needed.
You, of course, were in the engine room for lots of budgets, so you know what's going to be going on behind the scenes right now. What do you think is going to be happening? We're getting all these reports of worried secretaries of state lobbying the Treasury. What do you think will be happening behind the scenes?
I mean, some of this is absolutely standard. So having secretaries of state writing to the Prime Minister saying the cuts that are being asked of us are, outlandish. That happens every time. I think there's an added frisson this time, because I think a lot of these are Labour secretaries of state who expected to get into government and find that they had a chancellor that was kind of giving them largesse to spend, and they're a little bit shocked that actually they still have to do the day-to-day business of government, which is discipline with taxpayers' money. That's what people expect. What they're doing in the Treasury, by now they'll have a pretty good idea of what the numbers are, what the main measures are. That you can't do these kind of last-minute essay crisis budgets anymore, because the Office of Budget Responsibility requires those major measures to be in at least a week before. So basically this week it'll be wrapped up. I think that the great advantage Rachel Reeves has is that the Treasury will always have a back pocket, right? So the officials will have known for months that, okay, there'll be a new Labour government, they're going to need money, they've ruled out all these big tax rises, we better give them some other options. So I think that Rachel Reeves will have some, you know, I don't think it necessarily is to her disadvantage for people to be saying, oh, where is she going to find the money? Because the Treasury always has some surprises, whether it's tackling tax avoidance.
That old chestnut comes up every
year. The fact is that actually there is a rolling programme and the Treasury is constantly kind of clamping down on new things. And the evidence is that it does raise money. So there will be a back pocket that the Treasury will be helping her with. But I think in the end, she is going to have to break one of her election pledges. And I think it sounds like employer national insurance is going to be the one. If I were her and I needed to raise significant tax revenue, I would go all in on that, because I think the experience shows it's much easier to defend one big tax rise than to have a long series of fiddly tax rises that could unravel, each of which could cause a big political row. Have your one big row, say it's for public services, and take on the argument. And unfortunately, because of what they said in the election campaign, that will come at a price of people saying they broke their pledge.
You, of course, tried to get into Parliament at the election. You ran to be a Conservative MP and you didn't make it. Who do you think has a better chance of turning your party around, Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick?
Well, I've put my name to a letter that is going to come out supporting Kemi Badenoch. I actually think they're both good candidates. I think all four of the final candidates were good. I don't know either of them particularly well. From what I've seen, I think they'd both be good candidates. But yes, on balance, I'm going to be supporting Kemi. We,
of course, saw the comments by Christopher Chope saying she was too preoccupied with her children to be an effective leader of the opposition.
I mean, those are ridiculous and outdated and offensive comments.
I mean, you worked with George Osborne and David Cameron when they had young children as well.
David Cameron had a baby while he was in Downing Street. I mean, it's just absurd. It's sexist, it's old-fashioned, and frankly, these are the kinds of things that really damage the Conservative Party's reputation. We need to move on from these kinds of outdated views.
OK, thank you very much indeed. My interview there with Rupert Harrison, and of course there's going to be another week of lots of speculation about what will be in the budget, the moment when we really will find out the true colour of this Labour administration. I want to return to our top story now, though, because Israel has confirmed that Hamas's top leader has been killed in a military operation in southern Gaza. Yahya Sinwar was one of the chief architects of the October the 7th attack on Israel last year. He's also been their main target ever since the conflict began, so a very significant moment in the war in the Middle East. A warning that we are about to show an image from the scene of the Israeli military operation in Gaza, which some may find distressing. But the image that you are looking at now appears to show Israeli soldiers at the scene of the attack with the body of a man who is believed to be Yahya Sinwar in the rubble. So Israel confirming that that man is Yahya Sinwar. We've also heard from President Biden of the US saying that DNA tests confirm that he has been killed. Now, this evening, we've heard from Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who said that the death of Yahya Sinwar offers a chance of peace in the Middle East. But he did warn the war in Gaza is still not over.
He was killed by our heroic soldiers, and today we have finished our accounts with him. The evil has suffered a very harsh blow today, but we have not concluded our task. And to the dearly beloved families and members of the families of the hostages, we will continue until all those dearly beloved will be brought home.
A statement there from Benjamin Netanyahu saying the war is not over, that they will continue until all the hostages are brought home. We've also heard from the United States this evening. President Biden released a statement a short time ago. It reads, "To my Israeli friends, this is no doubt a day of relief and reminiscence similar to the scenes witnessed throughout the United States after President Obama ordered the raid to kill Osama bin Laden in 2011. Israel has had every right to eliminate the leadership and military structure of Hamas. Hamas is no longer capable of carrying out another October 7th. That statement there by the US President Joe Biden. We can speak now to Laura Blumenfeld, who's a former senior advisor to the US State Department's Israel-Palestinian negotiating team. Thank you so much for being on the programme this evening. How significant is this killing?
It's significant. I think what President Biden is saying, take the win. And this time there's more of an opportunity for Netanyahu to take it because this was an offensive win, unlike in April, where the president said to Netanyahu, take the win when they successfully defended themselves against an Iranian assault. Ever since October 7th, Netanyahu, look, it's been very political for him, but it's also very personal. He released Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's leader, in a prisoner exchange for a kidnapped Israeli soldier over a decade ago. And I think he felt personally that he'd been sucker punched. So today we saw the counter punch. And, when the score is even, Netanyahu is going full eye for an eye. There's a chance that we might be even.
Do you see any, discrepancy between what's coming out of the United States, where Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are saying, look, this is an opportunity to end the war, and then Benjamin Netanyahu is saying the task before us is not yet complete?
Well, I think they are working kind of hand in hand. I mean, the other significant event that happened today was B-2 bombers from the United States bombed 5 underground weapons facilities by the Houthis in Yemen. And that was a not too subtle message to Iran to say, this is what we're capable of. And if this escalates, it's not going to go your way. So, there has been some tension. I often think it's sort of like in real estate, it's location, location. The Israelis are an 11-minute golf cart ride away from the tunnels of Gaza. And the United States sitting here in Washington, we're an 11-hour flight from Kabul. So I do think that, there aren't always the same exact approach, but I think there is agreement on the problem. And the problem is a radical, hostile Iran that is bent on destroying Israel. It isn't a matter of borders. It's a matter of elimination of the state.
There's been a bit more frustration than that, though, hasn't there? You seem to just say, oh, it's just a small kind of difference of opinion because of geography. I mean, it feels to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels to me that there's been a deep frustration from the United States about many of Israel's actions.
Well, I agree with you. The United States and Israel might agree on the goal, but from the very beginning, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said, how you fight this matters, how you do this matters. And it's an issue of morality for the United States and human rights, which is important. The Israelis say we don't have the luxury for that. And that goes back for decades. I mean, you think of Prime Minister Golda Meir in the 70s when she said, look, I'd rather have a bad headline than a good eulogy. So I guess it's sort of an existential struggle for Israelis. And, they say that you can't always make nice in this really tough neighborhood. And yes, that has been a source of tension between the United States and Israel.
Do you think that we might look at this moment and think, this was the beginning of the end of the war? Or is that a bit naive, given, like you say, the kind of existential struggle that Israel feels it's in now?
Right. I'd like to hope so. I mean, Netanyahu said today is the beginning of the day after, and wow, wouldn't we all like to believe that? The problem is there still is an account open with Iran. Israelis are, bracing for the counterstrike that will come after they launch their strike, which is expected. 200 ballistic missiles were launched at Israel on October 1st. And so there are accounts open. I do think once, though, that this is over, this is a kind of very kinetic month. We're in October. Today was, you could call an October surprise. There's an opportunity to de-escalate, but I don't see that. Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, was quoting the book of Leviticus, saying our enemies will fall by the sword. So they still feel like they have capabilities in Hezbollah that they have to deal with. Hamas is degraded but not defeated. Rockets are still flying over Tel Aviv. So we're not there yet, but with some creative diplomacy, there's an opportunity now to get closer, especially if the hostages are released. It's just the most important linchpin, and that's why America's been so focused on it.
Do you see any glimmer of hope when it comes to the release of the hostages?
Well, I think it's interesting. If you listen to the hostage families, they'll say themselves, the death of Sinwar means nothing to us, and the lives of the hostages mean everything. So Netanyahu was calling directly on the Palestinians of Gaza, saying, lay down your arms, release the hostages, and you will go free. You will have free passage out of Gaza if you want. You will not be held, responsible. You will not die. I mean, because right now they're up against, Israel's formidable military machine. In the last Zagami public opinion poll in Gaza, Hamas had a 7% approval rating. So, I don't think Netanyahu is the right face for the public diplomacy to be saying to Iran, which he has been to Iranians, overthrow the grand ayatollahs of who are oppressing you, or frankly, in Lebanon, they're calling on the Lebanese to overthrow Hezbollah. And now he's turning to Gaza. It's kind of an odd messenger, but it's a reasonable message.
Can I ask you about the US election, which is fast approaching? That we obviously don't know the result of that. Things are very, very close. It looks genuinely too close to call. But we could have two very different presidents taking over from November. What kind of impact do you think that could have on the situation in the Middle East?
It's a great question, because in some sense, although Harris and Trump couldn't be more different, they do agree on one thing, which is that they don't want this war to continue on their watch. Trump says, quote, I'm quoting him, get your victory and quit the killing. And Harris has said many times just, about the sort of unconscionable killing of civilians in Gaza, and now moving on toward to Lebanon. So I think both of them are interested in this being over before they take over. And I think that's why what you're seeing is a kind of escalation by Israel in this kind of free-for-all period. In basketball terms, you might call it buzzer beater shots. Just before game over, you kind of throw your longest baskets. And the best, most optimistic, I guess, view would be that's what Netanyahu is doing. He's trying to just kind of even the score, call it a win, and then go back to what Israel's actually better at, which is building rather than blowing up. It's just a travesty what's happened over the last year.
Yeah, it is. Like you say, it's just been the amount of death. It's just the most awful thing to be witnessing, even though we're so far away from it. It's just absolutely devastating. Can you sorry.
No, I was just going to say that, look, Sinwar was the playwright. He wrote this script. He called it the Al-Aqsa flood. And he called it a flood because he wanted all the proxies of Iran to join in and join this fight. So the playwright is now dead. Does that mean the curtain drops on the stage and everybody can kind of go back to their lives? I mean, that is the hope. And that is what Netanyahu is aiming for, to see if he can take advantage of the kind of chaos now that's certainly carrying out in Gaza among the Hamas leadership, and bring this horrible chapter to an end.
You call Yahya Sinwar there the playwright, which is a very kind of evocative phrase. Can you just explain his significance?
Well, yeah, look, he wrote the script, and it's kind of a horrible thing to say, but he spent his years, he was jailed, I believe it was in 1982, and he spent or maybe it was 92. I don't want to misspeak, but he spent 20 years in Israeli prison. And he used to say that he understood Israeli psychology, the language, even better than many Israelis. And he exploited Israelis' weaknesses, including the fact that they will go to the ends of the earth to liberate hostages. That's one of their core values, because it's a small society and there's this kind of emphasis on every person is responsible for his brother or sister. So he understood the value of hostage taking, and he's exploited that. That's why when people ask, who will replace Sinwar as head of Hamas, there are many willing replacements, but I'm not sure there's somebody who has the kind of emotional evil genius that Sinwar had. That'll be really hard to replace.
Thank you very much. It's been fascinating talking to you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as we've been discussing tonight, some big news coming out of Gaza, because Israel saying that they have killed the leader of Hamas, who we've just been described to us as the playwrights of that terrorism towards Israel, confirmed by the US. That statement from President Biden saying DNA tests confirm Yahya Sinwar has been killed, one of the chief architects of the October 7th attacks. Now, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said the US will redouble its efforts with partners to end the conflict in Gaza following the death of Yahya Sinwar. We can cross now to our US correspondent Mark Stone, who is with us tonight. Mark, how significant is this moment?
A hugely significant moment. As you've been discussing, there's no question about that, and it is echoed by the statement, a very lengthy statement from President Joe Biden, where he details some of what we know about how and where he was killed, and he details
what he did, that he was the mastermind of the October the 7th massacres, says Biden, rapes, kidnappings. It was on his orders that Hamas terrorists invaded Israel to intentionally and with unspeakable savagery kill and massacre civilians, a Holocaust survivors, children in front of their parents, and parents in front of their children. So this is a deeply significant moment for sure. But of course, it raises questions about what next. I think through the course of this past year, Sophie, it has been the case that many have hoped, have believed that when Sinwar was finally captured or killed, that would create a punctuation point in this conflict, perhaps a full stop. Perhaps it would, for Israel, provide a closure for them to stop what is happening in Gaza and to move on, to withdraw from Gaza, to feel like it is for them, for Israel, mission accomplished. I think that question remains open because clearly in the north of Gaza, Hamas is still a significant fighting force, proving that it can still strike against Israel. And so even with Sinwar gone, as always with organizations like Hamas, you remove the leader, you cut the head off the snake, and other heads grow. And I think that may well be the case again with this one. I should say that we are awaiting a news conference from the Pentagon in Washington. What will that bring us? What more will that tell us? I don't know. My sense is that they will simply confirm that this was an Israeli operation, but clearly it will have involved American weapons. It may well have involved American intelligence as well. So we'll await to see what the Pentagon says. But certainly from the White House and indeed from the State Department, from Biden, from Blinken, this is a significant day, an achievement to have killed Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October 7th attacks.
Such a significant moment, as you were saying, Mark. We've just heard from Reuters via the State Department that the US is going to try and push a Gaza ceasefire proposal forward. So that coming from the State Department in the US, saying that the US is going to try and push a Gaza ceasefire proposal forward. It is pretty clear, isn't it, that America is trying to use this killing as a way to de-escalate.
Yeah, a full stop, as I described it. That's what they will be hoping. That's it, done, mission accomplished. But it isn't, I don't think. And as we've seen with the Americans, they have been unable to deal with or to persuade their ally in Israel to move on from this war now. And of course, the bigger challenge from an Israeli perspective is Iran. We're still awaiting what that Israeli retaliation against Iran, which it sees as the head of all this, the true head of the snake, how they deal with Iran.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there for us, reporting from Detroit. Well, significant news this evening. Israel and the US confirming that the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, one of the key architects of the October 7 attacks, has been killed. Many people, of course, across the world will be hoping that this marks a full stop on the conflict. But of course, Benjamin Netanyahu saying Israel's task is not complete, although evil has suffered